I was doing some planting or actually transplanting today, and I noticed that the St. John's wort that I told you I planted a little while back uh, never germinated. None of the seeds. I'm sure it can't be that none of the seeds are viable, but for whatever reason, they none of them ever germinated. I don't know if they got washed away in some storm or what happened. But as I was doing my transplanting and was digging up the soil, there were some roots from a plant that I kind of wanted to pull out. And I thought about the St. John's wort and I thought about the roots. And I thought, I need to talk to everybody about some of these words and more. And so on today's episode of Life's Potluck Buffet, we're going to talk about some homophones that are very interestingly not related. So stick around for today's episode of Life's Potluck Buffet. I'm John Paulus. Thanks for joining me. If you're enjoying Life's Potluck Buffet, please subscribe if you haven't already. If you have, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And if you have a Brave browser, you can now contribute basic attention tokens to Life's Potluck Buffet with John Paulus. Thank you for the support, and thank you for listening. Let me start with the St. John's wort, which I just threw some more seeds down. I'm hoping that maybe those will germinate. I don't know if the temperatures are going to be too warm for it to work, but we'll see. I'll keep you updated. Well, anyway, St. John's wort. The wort part of these worts, mugwort, you might know. I actually also have golden ragwort that I grow. It's a ground cover, an evergreen. I mean, it's even though it's like leafy, the leafy greenness of it doesn't always stays green, even in cold winters. And the flowers are golden, and they should be blooming soon, but they haven't yet. And that's a ragwort. And the wort ending of all of these, the St. John's wort, golden ragwort, mugwort, any of those worts, it's spelled W-O-R-T. It doesn't have to do with W-A-R-T. That kind of word is from a old word meaning injury. And that has nothing to do with the root of the I just said root. Ha ha ha. With the root of the word. This is all going to be about roots of words. Roots of roots. The root of the word W-O-R-T, which is the exact same root as the word, well, you guessed it, root. So wort and root come from the same root ultimately. It's a root that has to do with all words to do with roots and branches and things like that. So, and that root is also the root of the words like radical and, well, radish. And those all come from the Latin version radix, which means, well, root in Latin. And there's also words that you hear that have, like licorice, for example, also come from this root. Wait, this is going to be fun. I'm going to say root about 200 times today. The root in this case is from Greek, which has the same root again as wort and root and radix. And that's rhiza and glucurrhiza, which is sweet root. Glucus is sweet in ancient Greek, and rhiza is root. And so glucurrhiza is sweet root. And that eventually became the word that we know as licorice, which is pretty rad. So see, that's also from, anyway. So, okay. The word root, R-O-O-T, which is spelled the same as the word root for the plant parts, but can mean other things because it actually is just an accident of spelling and pronunciation over the centuries. There are two other meanings for root in American English. One which is less used is to dig around, to root around. That's used for usually animal digging, and or if you're rummaging. That's another word. If you're rummaging through stuff in your attic or basement, you're usually described as rooting around. Sometimes, but that is from a verb to do with to dig, and also the word root, which is used a lot in the United States for encouragement, supporting, cheering on a team, and the early use we'll get to in a second, uh, having to do with baseball, is spelled the same, root. It's the second word that is spelled the same, but as the plant root, but that may come from a third word that has to do with the bellowing of animals or the sounds that animals make. That is a real possibility for that one. Although I've seen explanations that say it's related somehow to the word for digging around, but I don't know about that one. Anyway, so those are three uses of the word root, root. There's also another word in English that's a homophone, and not a homograph, and that is route, which is the word for a road, especially in the United States, a road that is a kind of public highway, and there are some famous routes in the United States. The most famous is probably Route 66, which is was a very early kind of long distance highway. And there's a really interesting story. I think I'll tell it tomorrow about Route 66 that blew my mind. And there's also a Route 40, which is also a old and early highway in the United States. Route 40 goes from Atlantic City to, well, now it kind of peters out in Utah and Colorado, because I think what happened was the Interstate 80, which is the big modern highway system, well, interstate highway that goes from New York City to San Francisco. Parts of Route 80 um, like went over what was old Route 40, I believe. So that's why that disappeared. Route 66, by the way, goes from Chicago to Santa Monica, California, and there on the Pacific. So that's Route 66, and both of these routes have claim to the title Main Street of America. Apparently, I don't know if there are groups that support each route's claim to that, but if you're traveling along Route 40, you pass through Indianapolis, Indiana, where the person who wrote "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" was born. Although I think he wrote "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" as part of his work in New York and Tin Pan Alley, where a lot of songs got produced. And in that song, there's a famous line: "Root, root, root for the home team," and that's the word "root" as in cheer. For the home team. Something also interesting about that song that not a lot of people know is that there are verses to it, and the verses tell the story of a Katie Casey, who is a young woman who wants just simply not to be taken to the theater by her, as the song describes it, beau, but to be taken to the ball game, the baseball game. And she's a baseball fan. And that is something that you probably didn't know. I just learned it today. So I know I certainly did not know it, even though I'm familiar with the very famous chorus that in the United States, for those of you listening internationally, at baseball games in the United States, at a certain point, I won't get into detail, the song is usually sung by the crowd at every baseball game in every American's, and there are 162 games a year, so that's a lot of singing of "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." And very few people of the singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" realize that it's actually the story of a young woman who's like, "Hey, I don't want to be taken to the theater. I would just want to go see a baseball game." And the second stanza, the second verse, really talks about how she like argues with the umps a lot. She's a fan. She is a fan. So in honor of Katie Casey and everybody out there rooting for their home team and everybody planting plants around the world, let's and who cares about their roots? I hope all the roots are healthy and happy. Let's draw a card to ask about what our routine should be going forward. The routine is also related to the word root, as in Route 66, which by the way has to do with the Roman way of making a road. To break a road is how the Romans tended to phrase it, because you have to like break the ground and dig it up, and before you start filling it in with various materials. So when you're building a roadway, the word the rompere, which means to break, is used, and a form of it is rupta, and that's ruta that became root. So that's where that comes from. So let's talk about our routine, our way of doing things, and see how that's related to road. And we'll see what the cards say. So yellow lemons, blue dumplings, magenta noodles. Cards, tell us some things. All right, here we go. It's card 32. The back of your mind has a full-time job. So just ask yourself a question to solve, then refinish a chair or run an errand or take a walk or do whatever your mind-clearing activity is. And while you're doing that activity, the back of your mind is solving the problem. The same is true with dreaming. Conscious problems are often solved by unconscious thoughts. So think about what activity you do when you're trying to figure something out. Today, I know I was transplanting some plants. And think about what your activity is when you just kind of let your mind wander and solve problems that you have that the front of your mind is struggling with. I'll see you tomorrow on Life's Potluck Buffet, and I'll be rooting for you today.